Alright, this is going to be a different video. Today I want to talk about something serious, something near and dear to my heart, the Grand Theft Auto series. I don't think I need to introduce the games themselves, but what I will talk about is what I think is the most overlooked part in this series and what is seen in the two most popular games of the series. What I'm referring to is the Ballas and the Families and why I strongly believe that the Ballas are the better gang. This is the first part in a two-part series. In this video I will be talking about GTA San Andreas, and the next I will be talking about GTA 5. This is not a joke project, it's something I legitimately believe, and I love these games, but the favoritism towards the families always felt a little undeserving to me, even playing these games as a kid. So I thought I'd go into that in these videos. So in these videos I will be talking about the story content of the two games, but only the parts relevant to the topic at hand, the debate on who's a better gang. This means the happenings in the story, the background happenings, and the aspects only seen in the gameplay itself. I will talk about the story events first and then make my argument/analysis afterwards. And I'll also not bring up the strength of the main characters because that's just video game logic of itself and not a testimony to the gang's overall strength. Starting off with a history of what we know, the Grove Street families were formed sometime before the 1980s. The Ballas were formed presumably sometime in the 70s, and by 1987, the war was in full swing with the Ballas taking a lot of families' territory. At the start of the game, the Grove Street families have been diminished heavily, with only the OGs being the ones who gangbang on behalf of them. The Ballas, however, have taken almost all of the family's territory, leaving GSF with Grove Street as their only remaining territory. The leader of the Grove Street families is Sean Sweet Johnson, and the second in command is his brother and main character Carl C.J. Johnson. In the year 1987, when the two's 10-year-old brother, Brian Johnson, would die due to reasons not known by the player, Carl would abandon the funeral and move to Liberty City and become an associate for the Italian Mafia and have personal and business relationship with Joey Leone, son of Leone family Don Salvatore Leone. Somewhere during this time, the Grove Street families would split up into the sets Temple Drive families and Seville Boulevard families, in which a rivalry would begin between them. The Ballas would have 4 sets themselves, although they would be united and not rivals. These sets being the Temple Drive Ballas, Front Yard Ballas, Kilo Tray Ballas, and Rolling Heights Ballas. In 1992, the Ballas would attempt to kill Sweet to finish off the Grove Street families. This attempt would go wrong, and the two's mother, Beverly Johnson, would be killed instead. This would be the reason for CJ to return to San Andreas. Upon his arrival, CJ would immediately be falsely arrested and accused by the corrupt LSPD crash unit, Frank Tenpenny, Ray Pulaski, and Jimmy Hernandez, for murdering a police officer that was actually murdered by Crash himself. CJ is told not to leave the city and that he is being watched. CJ would get back to his hood, where he would meet up with OGs Melvin Big Smoke Harris, Lance Ryder Wilson, and his brother Sweet. The meeting spot would be at the grave of their mother, where the Ballas would attempt to drive by, but the crew would manage to escape. In the next few missions, it would be mentioned how much the families have diminished and how the families lost power due to them not selling crack cocaine, and to the Ballas even weaponizing crack against them to the point of making many Grove Street families members addicts, as seen in multiple missions and with OG Big Bear. A lot of families would also switch to the side of the Ballas, as seen with Beat Up and Little Weasel, and presumably many more. But CJ would almost single-handedly get the Grove Street families back on their feet and take over multiple Balla gang territories. The Grove Street families would have little weapons due to a police raid and would need to get firearms, in which Big Smoke would take CJ to see Emmett of Seville Boulevard families to purchase firearms, although only for CJ's personal use, and are also old and dysfunctional handguns. To get weapons for the gang on a whole, Ryder and CJ would break into a National Guard compound in a guns-blazing raid to steal weapons, of which they would do successfully. The Ballas would retaliate multiple times with attempts to get territory back, attacking a house party, an attempted drive-by, and attacking families on site, but to no avail. Sweet would also get in an altercation with SPF when visiting a girlfriend on their territory, leaving the brothers to kill multiple members of the rival set. Eventually, Sweet would reunite the 3 family sets at a Jefferson motel to beef up the family's roster and end the fighting between the sets. It will be revealed that the Ballas purchased their guns from the Russian Mafia and that they have connections with the Loco Syndicate, the Vagos, and the Sanfia Rifa for narcotics. Eventually, after their rise of power, GSF would launch an attack on the Ballas that would be a trap as revealed by Cesar Villapando, the leader of the various Los Aztecas who was in a relationship with Carl's sister, Kendall Johnson. The trap is revealed when Caesar discovers Big Smoke and Ryder are working with Crash and the Ballas, while selling crack cocaine and maintaining a professional relationship with the Ballas and selling out the families as they go along. Carl would go to save his brother and find most of the families either dead or in a shootout with the Ballas, as Sweet would be wounded. Carl would defend his brother until the police would arrive and arrest the two. Sweet would be taken to a prison hospital, and Crash would move CJ out of the city in order to do their bidding under threat that they would have Sweet raped and killed in prison. At this point, the Ballas and Big Smoke would begin openly working together, and the Ballas would provide protection for Big Smoke's crack empire. Eventually, CJ would work alongside the San Fierro triads to fight against the Loco Syndicate, including the San Fierro Rifa. While this would happen, CJ would gain the opportunity to go after Big Smoke's money shipments, in which it would be seen that some families had been working for Big Smoke in order to transport his money. In Los Santos, the Ballas would have completely taken over any and all of families' hood, with most of the families being in hiding, dead, arrested, or having worked with Smoke. With this, the Ballas would be once again the top gang in the city. Caesar and Carl, along with the San Fierro triads, would interrupt a meeting between Ryder and the Ballas and T-Bone Mendez, leader of the San Fierro Rifa, killing both Mendez and Ryder. Eventually, after taking out two members of the Loco Syndicate, and presumably the third one, Carl would go to help the Triads with their casino endeavors in Las Venturas. In order to help the Triads, Carl would initiate warfare with two mafia families and begin working with the Leone family, of whom he already had connections with, just to backstab them. The backstabbing would be leading up to a casino robbery in which the San Fierro Triads casino would be more successful. Soon after this, Tenpenny and Pulaski would attempt to kill Carl and Officer Jimmy Hernandez, but would only be successful in killing Officer Hernandez, as Ray would fail to kill Carl, leading to Carl in turn killing him, and leaving Tenpenny's unit without manpower for the time being. Around this time, Carl would be approached by the third member of the Loco Syndicate, Mike Torino, whom Carl thought was dead. Mike would reveal that he was a government agent using the drug money to illegally fund a war, and promised to free CJ's brother if he would help him with his operation. Carl would take Torino up on his offer, and it would pay off since Torino would have Sweet freed from prison. CJ would then tell his brother how successful he is now and about their new mansion and new connections with rapper Mad Dog, but Sweet would remain loyal to the hood, demanding they go back to Grove Street. The brothers would return to the neighborhood, and they would find families on crack and Ballas running this cul-de-sac. CJ and Sweet would take back Grove Street from the Ballas and get the gang back on its feet once again. Almost immediately after this, Carl would walk in on Sweet with his new girlfriend, at least I think that's what she is, where she attempts to get on a smoke crack, which due to stress he would have done if it wasn't for CJ interrupting. The girl comments on how she was sent by Beat Up to purposely get Sweet addicted to crack. The brothers would confront Beat Up, and Big Bear would quite literally quit being a crack slave of Beat Up and his crack addiction. After this, Grove Street would strike back at the Ballas, taking the entire area of Idlewood from them. Soon, Officer Tenpenny would be arrested by Internal Affairs for the murder of a fellow officer and many other crimes. This would be a big case, gaining a lot of media coverage, but due to a lack of evidence, the charges would be dropped on Officer Tenpenny, causing Los Santos to erupt into riots. This is when the Johnson brothers would choose to take out Smoke after taking territory from the rivals in order to find the location of where he resides. Once his location is discovered, Carl, with Sweet waiting outside, would fight his way through floors of Ballas, Rifa, and Vago members until finding and killing Big Smoke. And this would be the conclusion of the Grand Theft Auto San Andreas story, with anything else happening to this point being up to interpretation. Now, I feel like that sufficed enough as a summary for me to make my point. The Ballas are better. The first thing I want to bring to your attention is the organization. Not as per the organization, the Ballas themselves, more of their organization. The Ballas have been seen to be very organized, and have been seen to launch coordinated attacks, especially on the main hood of Grove Street, buy weapons from a reliable organized crime syndicate while the families turn to robbing the army. Of course, this does work well for them, but robbing the army is what they resorted to at the time. That's still mind-blowing to me. All of the Ballas sets are in unity with each other, working together and just not fighting each other. The Ballas are also shown to be good at using the tactic of weaponizing crack cocaine against GSF. Oh. Now on the Families side, this type of organization is not seen as much. This can be shown in their attacks, them having a set meeting at a hotel surrounded by enemy territory, the set tripping, CJ making enemies with 3 Italian mafia families, the San Fierro Rifa, and a Vietnamese gang. Not to mention how Sweet doesn't do much as a leader. Only rarely fighting, almost getting himself killed by SBF when he was busy trying to fuck some girl instead of putting in actual work. Sweet also lets Jeffrey OG Loke Martin and CJ kill a Vago, potentially starting more beef with the Vagos than necessary, all because Loke said the Vago was dissing him. Not to mention that he almost immediately tries crack after getting out of prison. More lack of organization can be seen in CJ's lack of communication with his brother. He never mentions to Sweet any of Sweet's weird involvement with the Russian mafia, nor his suspicions of Smoke's connections with Crass, and due to this, Smoke and Ryder's inevitable betrayal goes without a hitch. CJ also never informs Sweet about how, under orders from Tenpenny, CJ doesn't just kill Vagos, but also burns down their homes that could have had innocent civilians and children inside. Like, he literally burns down an apartment complex owned by the Vagos, but just because it's on their neighborhood and they live there doesn't mean innocents aren't in there. And of course, CJ does not inform Sweet about this at all. It's also worth mentioning how even with their rise in power up until the Green Saber, without any OGs, GSF crumbles completely in the events after that mission. My second point is loyalty. The Ballas seem to be of a very large size with their 4 sets, and the closest thing to betrayal that's seen is Beat-Up revealing that Big Smoke had him attempt to drug Sweet. Beat-Up doesn't reveal Smoke's location because, quote, only Smoke's lieutenants know where he is, but Ballas are seen to guard his base, at least at the final mission, which I think means Beat-Up is just low ranking as a Balla. The Ballas didn't provide protection for his crack palace at the time, or Beat-Up was just lying. Even in the end, it was the Vagos who revealed Smoke's location, not the Ballas. The Grove, however, has had their set split into 3, and then fight with said 2 other sets, have had members leave to work for Smoke and Ryder, traitors to GSF, and many members switch to Ballas. And my third point is the strength. The Ballas throughout most of San Andreas seem to be the most powerful gang. They also seem to be the largest gang in the city, despite GSF's comebacks, even though they are technically beefing with everyone besides the Vagos slightly, considering their business relationship. However, they still do maintain a rivalry on the streets. The Ballas also have been seen to have members available to go out of Los Santos and go into San Fierro and out in Angel Pine. The Ballas also have been seen to be having some of the most advanced weaponry than other gangs, despite not being seen with an RPG like the Veros Los Aztecas and the Vagos. This could be because they do not have access to one, although I doubt that with their Russian mafia connection, or they just don't want one because, as CJ said, possession of one is a very serious offense, or they're just not seen using one in the story. I feel like the second option is more likely, considering it's a very serious offense and the Ballas have been seen to be the most organized. Also, if the Aztecas have one, I'd be surprised if the Ballas didn't. The Ballas have also been seen to use legitimate tactics when attacking rival gangs. They've had multiple attack formations on the Mission House Party when they attacked Grove Street. They used crack as a weapon against Grove Street and their neighborhood, turning most of their members into addicts, and the previously mentioned weaponry. I know a point might have been made that the Ballas rarely ever slide or retaliate in the war. While that is true, you gotta remember that almost always in the game, the families are playing catch up to the Ballas, and they're the ones trying to take the city back. And of course, the Ballas do retaliate when they try to get territory back from the families. Other times, the Ballas are trying to knock the families off the map, which they do successfully after the mission The Green Saber. Now I feel like we should talk about the reason why the Ballas rise to power and why the Grove Street families declined. This is, of course, the distribution of crack cocaine. The Grove Street families do sell narcotics, but only marijuana and potentially PCP. However, they are against crack and the distribution of it, and for a good reason. Now, look, I'm obviously not for selling drugs, but the Ballas, just like the families, are in low-income neighborhoods, trying to survive the gang life, corrupt police, and poverty. They hustle for money and participate in gangbanging to help with that, or they just don't have a choice otherwise. I'm sure not all Ballas enjoy selling crack or hiring crack dealers to poison people because they're human after all, with feelings and emotions. However, they are doing what they're doing to survive. I'm no advocate for gang violence or being a criminal in general, but unfortunately, people gotta do what they gotta do to survive. The Ballas then consequently grow more in power and become more of a criminal organization than a street gang. Now, while you could say that them growing into a criminal organization is a contradiction to my point, I think my point still stands. You gotta think. They start hustling, they find something that works. They stick with it. Why would they stop growing? Snowfall's a Fire-ass series, by the way. Both the Ballas and the families never claimed to be this force for good here to help people. CJ can rob houses of people in his own neighborhood who did nothing to him. They're people at the end of the day, and they're trying to survive. But the Grove Street families don't sell crack themselves, making them at least slightly better people morally. Correct. But there is a high-ranking family who does directly participate in the distribution of cocaine. And that would be the GSF second-in-command himself, Carl Johnson. Carl Johnson helps the leader of the Loco Syndicate and government agent Mike Torino. Torino bringing in the drugs into black neighborhoods to fuel the crack trade and bringing in money to illegally fund a war in Latin America. CJ literally helps the problem. He helps the source of the problem. And of course, it is worth noting that CJ did try to eliminate the Loco Syndicate, and almost did successfully, but he still helps Torino once he figures out that he's alive. But hey, he did this to help his brother, and that is understandable. At least CJ doesn't directly have anything to do with the distribution of cocaine across San Andreas. And that's what I thought too. Until I found out about the courier activity. This is a mini-game in San Andreas that involves CJ getting a vehicle and going through checkpoints in a time period. But at each checkpoint, CJ has to throw a brick at the checkpoint. A brick that looks to be packaged as if it was drugs. And it even emits a white powder when thrown. This white powder is not there in the definitive edition, but this could be an accidental oversight. And even so, the definitive edition is not a reboot. The original game is still canon, so that white powder is still a thing. This courier mission can happen all across the state of San Andreas. CJ transports a brick of white powder throughout the entire state for money. While you could argue that's not canon because it's not mandatory for the story, I disagree. Because the fact that it's optional to do at all, by default, makes it canon. Let's face it, it's cocaine. CJ transports cocaine and doesn't tell anybody about it, and he just does it to make a quick buck. And yeah, cocaine doesn't mean that it's going to be used for crack, but this is during the crack epidemic in Los Santos. That shit's going to be used for crack. In conclusion, the Ballas in GTA San Andreas seem to be an extremely large criminal organization with connections to Russian organized crime and an influential, albeit distrustful, police unit that helps the biggest drug kingpin in Los Santos. The Ballas have loyalty, power, show legitimate tactics in war, and were the most powerful gang of Los Santos for at least half the game. Not to mention, probably the only reason why the Ballas haven't crushed the Families is because Tenpenny even says he just helps out the Families because he doesn't want one side to get too much power. The Families, however, are showed to be a street gang with a leader who rarely does anything, yet without second in command would cease to exist. With the second in command being reckless, starting beef with other criminal organizations, a hypocrite, having a great deal to do with the crack trade, yet calling the dealers the bad guys. The Families don't have nearly enough loyalty or organization or strength as their purple opposition. And that's it for GTA San Andreas. In the next and final video, I will be moving on to the two gangs in the HD universe with GTA 5 and Online. But until then, thank you for watching. I know this video hasn't been the best, but I worked really hard on this analysis, as I am still doing with the next analysis on the GTA 5 story and Online story, but I do think that these analyses are pretty good, and as said, I do legitimately believe everything I said. I know my other videos were jokes. This is not. I mean, it's funny to do videos about why the Ballas are better, but I mean, it's true, especially in San Andreas. But as said, thank you for watching.
Fuck them Grove Street fools!